Good morning. All right, welcome to our February Bridge meeting. Happy everyone is here. I am Don Rosen. I'm the Director of Records Management, Reporting and Oversight with the Office of Chief Records Officer. We welcome you all to here at the McGowan Theater, here at the Archives for our Bridge meeting. Glad to see everyone out and about after all that cold weather and ice and snow, and it's nice just to be out and about and have some nice weather. Hopefully that'll last for a few days. So we actually have a really great agenda today. I'm going to start off by talking a little bit about the SEO meeting we had last week, and also talk a little about reports. And then Lisa Haralampis, our Director of Records Management Policy and Outreach, is going to talk about email success criteria. And then Courtney Anderson from our Records Management Policy team is going to talk about our Records Management Line of Business initiative. So we're excited to hear about that. And then finally, Kevin Pratt is going to talk about the National Personal Records Center activities. So we welcome Kevin to talk about that as well. Before we get started, a few administrative notes I want to make. We do have Wi-Fi access, so anyone who wants Wi-Fi, you can certainly check that. We have that available here in McGowan. We are streaming today's meeting on YouTube, so if you go there, you can log into YouTube, and for those on the phone, you can submit questions. You can also submit questions via our Records Management Communications email address as well, and Shannon Olson will be monitoring those questions, so you can send them in. In addition, I'd also like to point out that Appraisal Team 3 is having a meet and greet at 1:15 this afternoon, so please join us. And I was also told to mention that there will be a representative from the Electronic Records Division, so if there's be an appraisal representative from there as well. So please come back after the meetings to join Appraisal Team 3. So that is some of their quick administrative housekeeping notes. And then with that, I'm going to jump into the meeting. And since I also get to be the first presenter, I will kick it off as well. So let me advance our slides. Oops. See if this works. We seem to... Hold on 1 second. We will start from the beginning. We are having a little bit of technical difficulty getting our slides to operate. Just one moment. So perhaps, Shannon, we can get a little bit of technical assistance on our slides. They seem to be... But while Shannon's going to help me look at our slides, I'm going to talk just briefly about, we had a SAO meeting last week where we had excellent turnout, where we had over 113 representatives from the various agencies with their SAOs in attendance. So we had a very good meeting where we had we started out the meeting with remarks from the Archivist of the United States, and he kind of laid out some of the challenges that we're facing, some of the work that we're doing at the National Archives to help agencies meet the goals of the directive, specifically some of the goals around email management and our goal of 2016 to have all agencies manage their email electronically. So that was some very good opening remarks. And then we had updates on reporting requirements. We talked about success criteria for email. Some of the topics that Lisa and I are going to dive into again today. And then we also had a discussion about transition and departing employees. Obviously, we're in a big year. Not only do we have the 2016 email deadline approaching, but we also have middle of a transition. We have lots of high-ranking people leaving and entering government. So we wanted to talk about some of the policies and things around that as well. So some of those things that we laid out for the SAOs. And the meeting was concluded with remarks from the administrator of OIRA, Howard Chalansky, and he talked about the challenges that we're all facing, that SAOs are facing, that records officers are facing in dealing with the challenges not only with email, but other types of electronic communications, how the volumes just keep growing, and the challenges that go with that. And in addition, we also had, before closing remarks, we had a Q&A session where we had lots of questions. It was a really good discussion where we were really challenged with how do we deal with some of the issues that we're all dealing with, meeting the goals of the directive, meeting the 2016, how each agency is going about it. So one of the things I'm going to be curious to hear about is if those of you who attended the meeting, did you go back and meet with your SEO, talk with your staff about the challenges and how we're going about it. What are the things that you're doing? So perhaps at the end of my remarks about reporting, if anyone has any experiences they would like to share about how the SEO meeting went, if they had any conversations with their staff afterwards, we'd certainly like to hear about that. So we did have the SEO meeting. That was a really good meeting, and we are happy to continue to work with that community. We think it's very important for you all to have really good relations with the SEOs and for us to communicate with them on a regular basis as well. So with that, I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the reporting activities that my program has been doing. As you know, we are in the middle of reporting season. Well, reporting actually ended on January 29th to get in your records management self-assessments and your SEO reports. I'm happy to say that we've actually had a really good response rate. We did give a few extensions to the end of February, but when we account for the extensions and the ones we received, we have almost 99% on the records management self-assessment participation. So I'd like to give you all a round of applause because that is excellent participation. So we appreciate that. We're also showing really good response for the SEO reports as well. I should point out on the RMSA, so as soon as you completed that, you should have gotten your preliminary scores. So if you did not, when you entered it in Qualtrics, let us know. We can help you with that. We do hope to have the reports out earlier as we do our roll-up report. Instead of being the fall, we hope to have it done maybe early summer this year, so working to kind of accelerate that. But we do need to take a bit of time to crunch all the data and put it into report format. We also, as you know, do some validation, and we will be doing a validation exercise as well this year. So, but once we do all that, we still hope to have it out sometime early summer is our goal. So we are, though I can give you a little bit of a sneak peek on some of the work we've been doing, looking at some of the initial raw data. The numbers are actually pointing in a positive direction. As you can see, we are trending. Those agencies that were moving from high risk to low risk has been continuing to go in the right direction, and it continued again this year. The numbers went up slightly, so that was good. And we're also continuing to see those agencies that were in high risk go the other way. The number of agencies in moderate risk continues to sort of stay the same, almost identical to last year. So the numbers are moving. They're not moving great, but they are moving along at a steady clip, and hopefully the RMSA continues to be a good tool for your agencies to use. One thing I always like to point out with the RMSA, it's just one snapshot in time. It is one tool to help you assess your program. Just because you have a great RMSA score doesn't necessarily mean you don't have any challenges with your agencies. A couple of interesting statistics I had our team pull to look at for this year. We did a snapshot of where we stand with email, since everyone's interested in email. This is just what people reported this year for methods for capturing email. These numbers aren't exactly precise as numbers are coming in, but just to give you a sense. When we asked some of these questions, how you're capturing email, 164 agencies said they were using email archiving tools, 133 said they're using the ERMS, and 135 still said they were doing some variation of print and file. So this was sort of a combination question. This was an answer where, if you recall, you could select more than one. So it kind of gives you a snapshot of where people are at. So it looks like people are still doing a combination of things as they work towards the 2016 goal for email. And kind of build on that, we did ask some capstone questions. So that was interesting. So we got some interesting data there. What we found is that lots of you are considering using capstone, considering using the GRS. So that was interesting feedback as well for us. So as I said, we're in the process of crunching those information, looking at it, but we were able to pull out a few facts that we thought you would find interesting for email. So that's where we are on the RMSA. Looking at also as the SEO reports. Again, they're also due on January 29th. And for this year, as we pointed out in the past meeting, we're going to be posting those on our website as we get them, and we've been doing them almost in real time. As we get them in, within a few days, we post them online for everyone to share. Last year and the year before, we did a roll-up analysis report. Those reports are available online. But this year, we're putting the individual reports as we get them in. So this is what our website looks like. So if you clicked on the 2015 SEO report, you would see a list of all the agencies. And if your agency, we have posted a report, you would see a hyperlink. And then you would click on the hyperlink and then you would see your report in PDF. So it is there. So the great thing about this is that it lets it's great for transparency, but you can also see what other agencies are doing. So it's a great opportunity to see other people are answering these questions, whether it may be tools or technologies they are doing. So it's a great way to share if you want to see what another agency is doing. So we're excited they're up there. We're also going to do a little bit of analysis as well, like we have in the past, and we'll be posting that information later in the spring as we start to capture all that information. So that's where we stand on reporting. So again, thank you for working with us on this reporting period. We know it's a lot of information that we ask of you each year, but again, we got a great response rate, and we're now in the process, as you can see, of just analyzing all this information and getting it back out to the agencies to use. So with that, I'd like to ask if there's any questions about where we are with the reporting period, the information that's out there now, or if any questions about either the RMSA or the SAO reports, or if you have any questions you'd like to ask or follow up for our SAO meeting. I'd be happy to take any questions about any of those topics.
Hi, Don. We have a question in our YouTube chat. It asks, is the print and file option prohibited under the Paper Reduction Act?
Is the print and file prohibited under the paper? I do not believe so, but obviously the goal of the directive is to move agencies away from print and file by the end of 2016. So that policy should be slowly moving away is how I answer that question there. But I don't believe it's specifically linked to the Paperwork Reduction Act. The goal of the directive, obviously, is to move us away from print and file and to manage all email electronically at the end of 2016. Other questions about reporting? Anything or any observations people had perhaps about the SAO meeting or things they might have had any discussions with our SAOs following the meeting, if you had that you'd like to share? No questions? Okay. So hearing none with that, I'm going to now turn it over to Lisa Haralampis, who is going to talk about email success criteria. So let's welcome up Lisa Haralampis.
Thank you, Don. My name is Lisa Haralampis, and I am the Director of Records Management Policy and Outreach here at the National Archives in the Office of the Chief Records Officer. I'm here today to talk about email success criteria. What is email success criteria, and why is NARA working on a new product at this time, and what will it be? We are looking at email management in 2016, anticipating what will happen January 1st, 2017. We know the date is coming, and we know that we've been asking agencies in our reporting, in the SAO reports that people have been turning online, are turning into us, and in the RMSAs that people have been filling out. We've always asked the question, will you be meeting the 2016 deadline? What are your plans? How are you moving towards it? And we have the feedback, which Don just showed a little bit. It said agencies said, absolutely, we will be meeting. Overwhelmingly, people said they would meet the 2016 deadline, which got us to thinking as we were looking at the data and looking at the responses that we may have different interpretations of what does successful email management mean. So one of the things that our office is issuing is the success criteria to try to help us have a commonality and an understanding of what does email management mean. We based the success criteria on the Managing Government Records Directive. That is where our goal is. That was where we came from. And NARA has come up with a definition of what we believe successful email management is. We've defined it as having the policies and the systems in place that ensure that emails, which are federal records, can be accessed over time and that their disposition can be applied. So we have, that is the statement that we will see that in some of our literature and the guidance products that we put out. We talked about policies and systems in place to ensure that emails that are records can be accessed and that disposition can be applied. For me, the key is accessed over time. No surprise, we are the National Archives. We're very interested in the end product of preserving emails that are records that are permanent. And if we cannot access them over time and the disposition cannot be successfully placed, then we have not successfully managed our email. So those are the 4 categories. We're going to be looking at policies, systems, access, and disposition. I'd like to give you a taste of what will be coming by reading what is some of the draft statements that we have regarding those 4 categories. It is our intention to issue this success criteria in March. We are still doing internal review, which is why I don't have the words on the page quite yet to share. We have some internal reviews to complete, and then we have a few external reviews to complete, but we are expecting to issue this guidance product in March. So what does success look like for policies? We have talked about your agency as policies and training programs that explain staff responsibilities for managing email and distinguishing between permanent and temporary, transitory, and non-record. So we pretty much have said for policies, do you have policies in place that explain what email management is, and have you trained to those policies? What does success look like for systems? Do you have systems in place that can manage email records in accordance with all the applicable regulations and requirements? And can you execute that disposition with your systems? Whether or not you're using a capstone roles-based approach, or whether you have a content-based record schedule, can the systems execute what the schedules say? The schedules also fall under our policy question. Do you have a policy in place? Are they scheduled? Do you know what the retention is? And can your systems execute it? What does success look like for access? Your agency's email records are going to be maintained in systems that preserve content, context, and structure, that protect against unauthorized loss or destruction, and ensure records are discoverable, retrievable, and usable over time. So hopefully, and then last but not least, we have disposition. What would success look like for disposition? Your agency has identified appropriate retention periods for email records, and they have the systems and policies in place to support timely disposition activities. The good news that I want you to take away is the words that I just said are nothing new. I did not get up here and say something radical and different that NARA is going to say this is what email management means. We have been telling a consistent story for years on what email management requires, systems in place, policies, training, that we can execute retention and disposition. And so that is why we're issuing this success criteria at this time. We think it would be a resource for you. We think that it will help make sure when we talk to agencies, when we talk to members of the public, when we talk to oversight, what did we mean by email management? It's not on the slide anymore, but I hope you would be able to remember it's systems, policies, access, and disposition. Those are the 4 categories we're looking at. Let me tell you a little bit more about the document that's going to be coming. We wrote the success criteria for several different audiences to create, again, this common understanding. The success criteria we started off with was a narrative document. You just heard the snippets from that narrative document. Hopefully that's what it will say when it goes out in final. And that was intended for senior agency officials, for seniors in agencies to be able to say, I understand and I have a takeaway, I understand what the 4 categories are, I can discuss what email management is at a high level. With success criteria next, so we sort of described here are 4 categories, and then we created a list of questions agencies would ask themselves. And they're like, do I have robust systems in place? And we intended those questions to be aimed at the agency records officer level, who tend to have to answer NARA's data calls on, are you managing email? And then last but not least, we're putting in the requirement, in the success criteria, a requirements mapping document. So we have looked at our Federal Records Act as amended in 2014. We're looking at the Code of Federal Regulations and in Chapter 12. And we looked at NARA's guidance. And we sort of said, if here are the 4 categories, here's a policy, what have we said in our laws, our regs, and our guidance products about email policies? And so we've created a mapping document that we hope will be a good requirements document for you. So we will put all of those pieces together, a narrative description of categories, questions that NARA will ask or will hope agencies will ask themselves, and a requirements mapping document. And those are the 3 components that are going to make up our success criteria. We hope to have that issued in March so that you'll be able to use this as soon as possible as you look at how what you're doing with email management in your agencies, and so that you'll get an idea coming around of how NARA will be evaluating whether or not agencies have met the 2016 goal. In the past, we've asked, are you going to meet the goal? In 2017, we'll say, have you met? And then this yardstick of the success criteria will give you the idea of what kinds of questions we will be asking. So we'll have questions you can ask yourselves and questions we will be asking. We're still working on how we want to do that data call and how we want to incorporate this into either the RMSA or the SAO report, or does it make sense to have a standalone question? So we at the National Archives are looking on how we're going to use it, but while we're considering that, we hope to have the product itself available for you to read and to review and to use inside your agencies. So again, the date of issuance, we are looking at targeting a March date. And to recap, it's success criteria for a common understanding of what do we mean by managing email. It's success criteria to use as a yardstick to measure progress. And it's nothing new for the directive. It's nothing new for email management. It's sort of recapturing what's in our laws in a way that we hope will be a tool you can use in your agencies as well. And that is the success criteria preview. And I look forward to coming back at a future BRIDG meeting and having the document itself to share and to have questions at the time, have more questions at the time. But at a high level, are there any comments or feedback on the success criteria? Anything people want to ask now? So policies, I leave you again, policies and systems, access and disposition. Those are the 4 categories that NARA will be looking for email management. Aha, I heard a question. Thank you very much. A question or a commentary for both.
Good morning. My name is Zelda Thomas. I'm with NCIS. And as the records officer for NCIS, we fall under Joel Westphal. Could you help me understand my responsibilities in all of this? Will he be meeting with us and with my agency as well to talk about this email management, to measure where we are as part of the Navy as a whole?
Thank you. So I think we'll have to take that question offline because it's very specific to your agency about where we meet with the Navy and with Joel, how it would fit. Because I don't know if I would have the answer off the top of my head to give you this one. I'm sorry. I'd like to be able to answer it as quickly as possible, but the DoD is very. When we do the SAO report, they have multiple SAOs. So imagine the SAO for Navy has its own, and how far down they want to go with the various echelons and components and where they roll information up. I don't have that information off the top of my head. I'm sorry. But we'll talk offline. I saw another question.
I don't know if this is really more of a question than a comment. I'm Luz Ortiz from DOD. I deal with email a lot, and especially now, I'm not looking forward to the transition because I know we're going to be producing email. And there's this perception by the employees or those that have email accounts that this is their data. And that perception is sometimes hard to overcome, even with the assistance of General Counsel. So if in a way you can make that clear that this email is not yours, that it belongs to the department, and that that's one of the issues I talked about. Is my concern is the discovery or the access over time, because we're going to have a huge volume of emails, and really the way we have set up IT and CIOs have set up the email accounts in the department, it's going to make that very difficult for us without proper funding and budgeting. As we've captured emails of departing officials, right. But our system that we're currently keeping it in, I don't think it's going to be the perfect system to manage that email over time. And I think this is a role that NARA really needs to make clear to the SAOs. As a records officer, I can't convince IT or another agency to give me access, or to give us access, access at the department for FOIA or for declassification requests to this email account, unless that stigma that this is not your email, this is the Department of Defense email.
I'll share 2 points in response. Like I said, I appreciate your commentary, an issue that we all face. The first point being the Federal Records Act with the forwarding and the copying of email 20 days after creation. What concerns me is that there could be a perception this is my email, but if it's managed on an agency system, there are controls in place for managing that email, regardless of the individual's position. But if the individual then takes it a step further and says, but it's my email and I'm going to use whatever system I wish, then those information's being created in systems that are outside of government control. And that is exactly what the law is trying to create. So the awareness there of, you may have that opinion, but you must use agency systems. Agency administered, agency authorized systems is the key. That helps combat that. And the second part is that's where I think you'll start seeing us talk about access more and access over time. And one of the criteria that we were looking at was sort of mapping, these are the access laws related to records management, and these are the access laws related to information management that are key over time. So we did put some of those into our criteria, trying to articulate that key component of records and information management. So yes, hopefully we'll be seeing more information along those lines. All right. Well, thank you very much, and we look forward to continuing to talk about email management. As I said in my remarks, and I'll close again, December 31st, 2016 is one date, and January 1st is the next. And we will always be working on email management. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Lisa, for that presentation. So our next speaker is Courtney Anderson of the Office of Chief Records Officer on our policy team. And Courtney is going to come up and talk about our records management line of business initiative. So let's welcome up Courtney Anderson.
Good morning. Thank you, Don. As Don said, my name is Courtney Anderson. I am on the Records Management Policy and Outreach team at NARA. This is actually my first time presenting at BRIDG. I've been to many meetings, but this is actually my first time up here. So I'm happy to be here to talk today about the electronic records line of business. So what we hear a lot from agencies is that NARA does a good job giving agencies guidance on what they have to do to properly manage their records. But what agencies have told us they need is the how. How do they actually do it? And so this year, NARA is looking into the feasibility of offering an electronic records management line of business. We've been able to bring on some contract staff this year to look into it, to explore the possibilities. And what we would like to do with the line of business is to actually make it easier for agencies to obtain services and solutions to help manage their electronic records. We're hoping to have agencies work together. Maybe if one agency, for example, has an electronic records management solution, that they could perhaps offer it as a shared service to other agencies. So we're leveraging common solutions to help agencies meet the targets in the Managing Government Records Directive. We're hoping that this will help agencies share resources and save time and money on going out and actually procuring tools and services. So this year, as I said, we're exploring the possibilities, and we have some key milestones. The contract was awarded in September, and we began stakeholder interviews. We've been doing that since September. We drafted a project charter. We're in the process of establishing a steering committee made up of key NARA stakeholders to help guide the project. In March, we will have a concept of operations of how this would work and what it might look like. And then in the March to July timeframe, we are developing a common solutions and services plan on to show actually what some of these solutions and tools would be that we will offer. We are also developing a governance model, which will be coming out in August. And part of that, we will actually be setting up a governance board, which will include NARA stakeholders and also external agency stakeholders to help guide the line of business and determine what services and solutions will be offered. And finally, we will be developing and standing up a project management office, and that's ongoing from March to May. So we have, as I said, we talked to over 20 stakeholders, both internally to NARA and externally at other agencies. And we've had these interviews to determine what type of solutions and services agencies are actually interested in. And we've come up with some ideas of what may be offered. The first we've been talking about is having NARA act as a clearinghouse for different solutions and services. And what this might look like is if you're an agency, you could go to a website. And let's say you're interested in, for example, auto-categorization or email management tools. You could come to this website and look at 3 different categories of tools or services. The first would be services offered by NARA, for example, services offered by our Federal Record Center programs. The second would be services offered by other agencies. For example, if another agency has an auto-categorization tool that works well for them, then they could offer it as a shared service to other agencies. And then finally, we would have vendor solutions, where there would be procurement vehicles for agencies to obtain those services. The first two, for NARA and for the services offered by other agencies, the shared services, you could enter into an interagency agreement, and the website would give you instructions on how to do that and next steps. So that's one of the ideas that we've come up with. Another is to provide contract vehicles to simplify the procurement process. We've heard a lot from agencies, especially medium to small size agencies, that the procurement process is very time intensive and resource intensive, and it's hard for an agency to go through this whole process, especially when pretty much every agency is going through the same thing. We're all looking for similar tools and services to help with electronic records management. So what we're looking into is offering like an IDIQ or a BPA to make the procurement process a little simpler. So then agencies could just enter in a task order on a contract that NARA holds or another agency holds instead of going through the whole procurement process themselves. We've also heard from agencies, especially medium and smaller size agencies, that they would love to have some cloud storage that is DoD 5015 compliant, so that they could just put their records there and have them be in the cloud and managed properly. And then if they're permanent, they could eventually go to NARA and they wouldn't have to do this all on their own. So that's another service that we're looking into. Another is providing capstone implementation for email management. We've been looking at perhaps providing email management tools, help streamline that process if there's another agency that has a similar tool that they'd like to offer as a shared service, providing that. We've also looked at establishing specifications and testing ERMS agency electronic records management systems. We know that we're all out there writing requirements and specifications for these systems. So if we were able to provide some of the specifications and then actually help agencies do some testing, it would help alleviate some of the burden on the agency. And then they would know that, the agency would know that it would function and be in compliance with NARA guidance and regulations. We've also talked about creating an XML schema that agencies can use to help transfer permanent records, something they could use in some of their databases that contain permanent records to help make the transfer of records to NARA easier. That was actually something that we heard from both NARA staff and also from agencies to help with the transfer of the permanent records to help streamline that process and make it easier to transfer large amounts of data. And finally, we've also talked about offering a test lab for vendor solutions. So we could actually test vendor tools and solutions and see if they, for example, like auto-categorization or declassification, to make sure they're properly working and meet all of NARA's requirements. And then agencies could procure or use that solution and know that it meets all of the requirements, all of NARA's requirements. So that is a quick overview of what we are doing this year. Like I said, this is a year where we're exploring what this may look like. We're still meeting with stakeholders, so if your agency is interested in providing input or meeting with us, this is a great time to do it because, like I said, we're still in the process of thinking about what this would look like. So please, if you would like to meet with us, please reach out to me or Ariane Robinbosch, and we'd be happy to set up a meeting to come talk with you. And I'd also be happy to answer any questions or comments. Yes?
Yes, my name is Gladys Thompson with DITRA. How does this whole process that you just briefed on works with the DCMO? Because we have been trying to work with DCMO. That's what we were told, that we had to work through them to get a record-keeping system. But there's different phases and processes, and so we're working through them. What you just briefed is would make it so much easier for our J6 people to acquire a system, because the process for going through DCMO is horrible.
I may have to get back to you on that because we can meet with you separately to talk about that since it's specific to your agency, but we'd be happy to talk with you and see how that would work. Because like I said, we're interested in talking to all the agencies. I'm sorry I don't have an answer right now. And also, if you're an agency that has like a really great auto-categorization tool or email management tool or electronic records management system, and you're interested in being a shared service provider, we would love to meet with you too.
Hi, Jesse Johnston from the National Endowment for the Humanities. I was on the electronic records working group call a couple of weeks ago where you talked about some of these things.
Yes.
And a couple of people mentioned issues relating to Capstone, and you mentioned it here. If you have any thoughts about what that might look like when you talk about Capstone implementation, are you thinking of developing tools or just resource lists? Just anything that we might be looking for in terms of the agencies that are thinking about implementing Capstone, what sort of resources might be coming along?
I think what we're talking about is providing, for agencies that have implemented Capstone, if they have an archiving tool or something that's working well for them, we could provide that information. Also, we may even look at some vendor solutions and have a list of those or offer some of those for email management or email archiving. And that's kind of what we're thinking of, like the tools to actually implement Capstone.
Hi, I'm Mary Beth Weaver.
Hi.
I'm a contractor with Department of Defense. Quick question about the IDIQ BPA option. Are you looking at just vendor technologies on that, or are you also going to have like RIM consulting firms, or what's the vision for the IDIQ?
We've actually, we haven't talked specifically about what the vision is yet, but I think we're looking at both. Yeah, it wouldn't necessarily just be tools. It could also be consulting services. Yes. We're really open. Right now, we're open to, whatever we can offer to help agencies is really what we're looking at right now. Are there any other questions? Well, thank you so much for your time. And like I said, if anything comes up, please feel free to contact me. Thank you.
Thank you, Courtney. Again, this is an initiative we're really excited about, and we look forward to meeting and working with other agencies as we go forward the line of business work and sharing progress as we go along. So this is something we'll report on often as we move forward with other BRIDG meetings. So our next presenter is Kevin Pratt from the National Personnel Record Center. Kevin is the Assistant Director for Military Records, and he's going to discuss the National Personnel Record Center program. So with that, let's welcome up Kevin Pratt.
Good morning, everybody. I'd like to thank my colleagues here in Washington, D.C. for inviting me up to do the presentation today. I don't get a chance to get out of St. Louis a whole lot, so I appreciate this, and I appreciate the fact that the weather was nice enough for me to land yesterday. So I'd like to start by taking a look at the organizational chart. Let's see, do we have a pointer on this? There we go. One of the things that I like to point out as far as where we fall into the organizational chain, we fall under the director of the Record Center program, which means we're a reimbursable activity. So we're keenly focused on our customers who we're serving, but we're also focused on the customers we're providing the end-line product to, which is the veteran or their next of kin. So we kind of have to balance both of those worlds. Sometimes we're advocating for the customer, and sometimes we're advocating for the veteran. So as I go through the presentation, please keep that in mind. We also, at the National Archives in St. Louis, we have an organization here led by Brian McGraw. Since the records that we have in the Archives Drive facility are gradually becoming accessioned by the National Archives, his staff there is working with us. We work with them as a customer because we actually do work for the National Archives, and we also work with them as a partner in terms of trying to solve some of the problems we have associated with the 1973 fire, and I'll talk about that in a little bit. And then we also have a preservation office located in St. Louis that helps with reconstruction of the records and is also working with some of the damaged records as a result of the fire. As far as the National Personnel Record Center, on the Record Center side, there's really two facilities that that service those records. First is the facility that I'm in charge of, which is at Archives Drive. That really has most of the permanent records that are going to eventually be accessioned by the National Archives. The second facility there to your right is the Valmeyer facility, which is temporary records. It previously was known as a civilian records facility, but when we made the switch back in 2009, we made a decision to have the permanent records housed at Archives Drive, which would include some civilian records, which are going to be part of the National Archives, and we had all the military records there. On the civilian side, they have the civilian records, also they have the military treatment records. And so we work very closely with them in responding to requests from veterans, because sometimes a veteran will want their personnel record, but they'll also want their military treatment record. This is a view of our facility at Archives Drive. As I said, new facility for us. We started there in 2011, but back in about 2009 is when we started making the transition between the two facilities. This facility, which is located in Valmeyer, Illinois, is a cave facility. It's a limestone facility there. We started moving records there in 2009, and records really moved from 2009 all the way through until 2012. And during that time, we were vacating a facility in downtown St. Louis that housed most of the civilian records, and there was another facility at the Page Avenue where we had most of the military records. And as we made that transition, as I said, the temporary records went to the Valmeyer facility, and the permanent records went to the facility at Archives Drive. Actually have about 4.8 million cubic feet of storage in both facilities, 2.3 million cubic feet in the Archives Drive facility, and 2.5 million cubic feet in the Valmeyer facility. We have both textual and micrographic information there. The military records, as the years went by, some of them transitioned from paper to paper and microfilm, and some are exclusively microfilm. Most of the employees work at the Archives Drive facility. We have about 600 people there, and then about 100 people at the civilian facility. I have a slide here with the payroll, and the reason I put that up there is we're very keenly aware of the costs associated with running our operation. We try to be as efficient as possible when we run the operation, and so when we have a snow day, we recognize that we're paying $15,700 in terms of salary, and so we want to make sure that we're doing what we can to be as productive as possible every day that we're coming to work. We respond to 1.5 million requests a year. A little bit different than most of the Federal Record Center programs. A lot of the Federal Record Center programs are largely storage and destruction facilities. They store records for a while and then destroy them as they reach their schedule. What we do is that when I refer to that 1.5 million, that's individual file level reference. So about 1.1 million of that is actually veterans or their families writing into us, and about 400,000 is agencies coming in asking for that record, but it's always down to the individual file level. In order to be able to process all that work, we have some fairly aggressive performance goals to make sure we're meeting our customers' needs, both the customers that are paying the bills and also the customers that are the end-line result of our work. We try to deliver the records. When I say L&Ts, those are the 400,000 records that are going to agency users for whatever reason to go through that record. Board of Corrections, sometimes the service departments themselves want to get a look at the record. So we do about 400,000 of those a year, and our goal is to try to do that in 5 days or less, 95% of the time. Normally it averages about probably 2 to 3 days. Same thing with separation documents. Very important for us to get the separation documents turned around very quickly. Typically those are associated with benefits for the veterans, and so we want to be able to turn those around as quickly as possible. Our goal is to do that 10 days or less 90% of the time, and we're doing it about 94.7%. These are based on the first quarter of FY16. Same thing with FOIA, have a responsibility to get those out in 20 days. We're hitting them mark 100% of the time there. And then the customer service, we do a customer service survey twice a year to try to get feedback from our customers to see how we're doing. Right now we have a backlog of requests for not separation documents, for other things that people want, and because of that our customer service scores have gone down a little bit. Typically when we're able to respond within about 20 to 30 days for all requests, that metric is met. Important point here, obviously the military service departments are a large part of our revenue, but down there you'll see NARA services at $3 million. That number continues to increase as the number of records transition from being owned by the service departments to being owned by NARA, so that bill goes up every year. We serve, as I said, we serve as a contractor for the National Archives and perform that work for them just like we do for the service departments. I'd like to spend some time on this slide to kind of walk through the order fulfillment process, just to give you a sense for kind of how the business flows through from start to finish. So when the requests are received, we receive about 5,000 to 6,000 requests per day. Typically, those requests are kind of broken down to about 60% of them are either through fax or through actually written letters or cocktail napkins. We'll take anything. And that information is then keyed into our case management and reporting system, which is the kind of a customer relations software package that kind of runs our whole business. The other 30% come in through an application called eVetRex. eVetRex is an application that allows veterans or the next of kin to actually go in and key in the metadata. The problem is right now, because it's an older platform, we require people to send in a signature page in order for us to process it, because we want to make sure we verify identity. We're working on an upgrade to that right now so that we can do it all electronic. People are kind of used to Amazon now, so the way that we're doing things with the fact sheet is really not the best way to do it. So hopefully within the next year and a half we'll be able to put that in play. But after that information is keyed into the system, the mailroom has to make a decision. We've decided that the most efficient way to process our business is to bucket things into two different kind of categories. One is an others case, which really would not be associated with benefits, and then the other is a separation document case. As I mentioned, in order for us to hit that metric of hitting that 90%, 10 days or less, we have to be able to bucket that way. And so the way we do it is every day separation documents are ingested ahead of others cases. We do that to make sure that we get the benefits cases out as quickly as possible. So in the mailroom, they're going to make that business decision. Then it will flow into our pre-processing. And what we do there is the system has intelligent logic that it can look at our registry of the records that we have in our holdings. It's able to identify the metadata in the request with the registry number, and about 45% of the time it's actually able to put a search request in for that record without a technician actually having to review the record. So about 55% of the time, the technician actually has to go in and look at a series of records, go through a pick list, and order the record to be searched. It then kind of moves into our search area, and what they do in the search area is they batch the work based on the most logical place that that's going to be based on what's in the registry. So in other words, we have a registry system, the technician selects that record, we are going out to the stack area with staff manually looking through the boxes, grabbing the responsive record, and then routing them into our records retrieval hub to be then distributed to the staff members. We have a fairly high likelihood of retrieving a record if it's in the registry. Typically about 95% of the time we're able to identify that responsive record and move it to the records retrieval branch. We give them 3 days to do this work because we want to try to be as productive as possible when we do our searching. And so if in a distant area of the stacks we have just 1 or 2 requests, we'll wait till we get a batch of those so we don't have to send a staff member to that distant area of the stacks. All our staff members are on a productivity quota. Our searchers, the people that do email, our correspondence technicians all have a productivity quota. That allows us to be able to project work and productivity as we go through the day, as we go through the week. And that's also part of their performance plan. So we do have a bonus structure that's in place, though. That's kind of the good side to have on a productivity standard. And that's something that our staff enjoys, and it's a very regular thing that we do on a month-by-month basis. After the records are searched, then they move into the correspondence team. The correspondence team has 3 days in order to do their work, and that would include preparing the correspondence back to the customer, making all the applicable copies they need to make, and then we have a QA program that we put all our work, that we pull 5% of our work through. So the way that the work flows through the system is the computer randomly selects 5% of the work to be audited. We rotate a group of 32 subject matter experts every day, 8 people every day, to be able to go ahead and look at that work to make sure that the product that was produced by the technician meets all the requirements. We ask our correspondence technicians to be familiar with all the branches of the service. So we support all the different branches of the service that have paper records that are retired to the center. And the technicians have to know the service records of all those different branches of the service. So it takes about 150 days from start to finish in terms of training our technicians until they're ready to be able to get on productivity and be able to process a case. And then we have a day that we use to get it processed through the mail. Throughout the process, we actually have a barcode system that's associated with an individual request and a unique request number. And so therefore, we're actually able to track real time and also with great precision exactly the cycle time. So when I talk about that 94.7%, the 94.7 cycle time for the separation documents, that is a real measure based on the barcode as it moves through the system. I put this slide up just to kind of give a sense for, we have a blended rate of $37 that we charge for our correspondence cases. And this is just kind of part of the work that goes into that $37. We have a call center associated with the center to answer any incoming phone calls. We typically get about 5,000 to 6,000 phone calls a week, and that's covered in part of that blended rate. We have a research room for the Record Center side at the facility at Archives Drive. We also support the Valmeyer facility there, and we also have a public research room that's operated by the Research Services side for the public records. This just gives you a sense for, in terms of volume, the records and exactly what's being requested over the course of the year. As you can see, benefits is number one, and if that makes sense, because about half of our requests coming in are for separation documents. But if you look there under employment, also under medical and retirement, those are also probably associated with benefits. So big percentage of the work that's coming to us directly relates to benefits for veterans or their family members, so it's very important for us to be able to produce those accurately and timely. Something that I constantly remind my staff about, that each piece of paper that's transiting through the system is some veteran who is seeking benefits, and it's important to remember that versus just another piece of paper that they're shuffling through the desk. We shuffle a lot of paper. We have to recognize that that is a veteran who's looking for benefits. I talked a little bit a few minutes ago about the loan and transfer process. These are records that we select to be transferred to another facility. It's a very similar process in terms of the way that we do the searching. We put a little higher priority on those searches because, again, we have a 5-day deadline to get those out and get those to the service departments, whoever's requesting them. We do have a way to track those records. We put a barcode, fix that to the record, and the people that have access to order the records are also in our case management reporting system. So we track the records when they leave our facility through USPS, and then when they arrive at the facility of the gaining command, they actually go into our system and then indicate that they've been received. So we can go into our case management reporting system, see that the records have been received, and we can track those. Likewise, when they come back through to be refiled, we'll go through that same process again. This is the key, because what we will do is we'll make sure that if a record's out for 30 days or more, we'll start pinging those people that have the records to make sure we get them back. Even though most of the records are still owned by the service department, we have a responsibility to make sure that we get those records back in control as soon as we can. And so after about 30 days, we go ahead and start asking whether they still need those records. And we try to keep about 35 to 40,000 records out at a time. Once it gets above 40,000, I get a little bit concerned, but it's something that we talk about on a weekly basis at our production meetings. I want to spend just a few minutes and talk a little bit about the preservation side and the archival side as it relates to our business. As you can see here, most of the collection that is in Archives Drive right now is going to transition to become part of the National Archives by 2067. So the way that works is there's a virtual accessioning that takes place every year, actually every day. The way that the records were retired by the service department didn't necessarily correlate for when people separated from service. The decision was made several years ago that 62 years from the date that the member separated from service, those records would transition to the National Archives. And then each year, the Research and Services staff will do a virtual accession of all those records over the past year that have moved. We'll take that space off from the service departments being charged, and then any case that's worked on those records will be charged to the National Archives. The challenge with that is that, as I said, the records weren't retired in batches so that we could easily kind of segregate where those records are. So what happens is my staff works those cases. Actually, on our case management reporting system, we have a little marquee every day that says the date that those records have turned archival. So my staff is responsible for going through reviewing the records to determine whether they're archival or not. If they are, they stamp them as archival, and then they have to apply a different set of business rules to work those cases. Obviously, once they're open to the public, much less redactions, and they're able to work those cases a little bit differently. However, if they're not for benefits, there's also a charge associated with those because of the reproduction. So my staff is responsible for sending an invoice out for the National Archives, collecting that money for them, and then processing the case for them. It's really important, as I said, for us to have a great relationship with the folks in Research Services, because for the records that were impacted by the fire, we don't have the records, obviously, because they were destroyed in the fire. At the time of the fire, we did not have a good registry system, so we know volume-wise, we think we lost 16 to 18 million records, but we don't know with precision exactly which records were lost. At the time of the fire, we reached out to the service departments, and they provided us auxiliary records that we could use for the record reconstruction process. Those included morning reports, also pay vouchers, and so we work with the archival staff, since all those records are now part of the National Archives, to get that information to do record reconstruction. About 3,000 cases a week are still involved with the fire. So my staff, I have two teams that are dedicated 100% of their time to do record reconstruction. And so what they're going to do is they look to see if there is a record that was recovered to the fire. We have about 6.5 million records that were either reconstructed or were damaged during the fire but are still being able to be retrieved, and we can get data out of them. And they'll use that to do a record reconstruction. And when I talk about a record reconstruction, it's specifically we're just trying to get the member in service, out of service, and the characterization of the discharge. We really can't completely reconstruct that service. So if a member or a family member is writing in about their medals or specific things, medical records, we're not able to capture that information. We also do partner with the Veterans Administration. In some cases, the veteran would have applied for benefits, and as part of that process, in that claim process, they extract information and documents from the record, and that becomes part of the claim folder. So what we'll do is we'll reach out to the VA, get those documents to help do record reconstruction. We also work with the states. The states, in many cases, after the veteran left service, especially World War I and in some cases Korea, they would turn their separation documents into the state as part of a benefits package associated with their service in the military. And so we'll reach out to those states and try to get copies of those separation documents as well. So it's a very labor-intensive process, and we couldn't do it without the support of the folks in the archival side. The other thing that we also use regularly is the selective service cards. Those were distributed at one time across the country. Now they've been centralized in St. Louis. And really what we're hoping to do in St. Louis is really have all the personnel-related records there. So it's a one-stop shop for researchers. So you can go and get the individual deceased personnel files, court-martial records, the personnel records, and as I also mentioned, those OPFs or those civilian records, a little bit later than 1960s, have a rich amount of information in them that might be, that we also use those actually to do record reconstruction on the military side, because in some cases people left the military service, went right into civilian service, and were able to get information from those personnel records as well. The 100,000 written request right there annually is going up over probably been going up very steadily over the last 5 years as more and more records have become archival. And then the preservation program. We have a state-of-the-art preservation lab that deal almost exclusively with the fire-related records. Because of the damage associated with the fire, a lot of the records are very brittle, and they'll actually introduce those into an environment that puts moisture back into the paper, relaxes the paper, and we process it. The difference between this preservation program and the rest of the National Archives is that they're really like a MASH unit, to borrow a 1970s TV reference. What they do is they look at the record. They know that what we need the record for is we need to access the data so that we can provide a response to the customer. We really don't have the time or the resources to completely preserve that record as they would like to do. So only at about less than 1% of the time are they able to go through a full record reconstruction. For the most part, they're analyzing the record to see if it can be handled safely. And if not, then I have members of my staff that will actually make photocopies and get that to the technicians to do the work. Or in some cases, what they're doing now is because of the damage to the records, they're actually doing some shoots. They're doing some videotaping and some shoots of the record, and they're able to do some filtering as they take shots of that record to be able to filter out some of the different copies. And I don't understand it well enough because I'm not a preservation person, but they're able to, because the ink and the paper burn at different temperatures, because of the different contrasts, they're able to pull up information. And so they're doing some microfilming of that work, and also being able to produce a CD for us so that we're able to take that, give it to our technicians, and they're able to extract information that they wouldn't otherwise be able to extract. And so right now they're doing about 60,000 images a year, and that process is growing every day. They've been experimenting with it for a couple of years, and now they're getting really into a more production role with that. The other thing that they do is, if the record is in fact still owned by the service department, then they will go ahead and do a full treatment on it if that service department actually needs that records. Typically, Board of Corrections might need the actual original record to look through it, and then they're going to have to take the time to go through those records and do the full preservation on it. But that doesn't happen very often. For the most part, they're extracting the data or making sure that it can be treated safely, and then they give it to us. One of the neat things about the facility in St. Louis is we actually have our preservation lab. It's all self-contained. There was a huge issue with mold after the fire. Fire occurred in July in St. Louis, and despite their best efforts to try to inhibit the mold growth, that's still a significant problem for them. And since we only are retrieving those records based on a request, some of those records haven't been touched since the fire. They're sitting in a 50-degree cooled environment, and then when they get into the more normal office environment, sometimes the mold will bloom. And so the preservation folks will go in there and they will do some remediation of those records before they're handled. But it's all done in an area where we don't have a problem with mold growth getting throughout the rest of the building. So it's all self-contained in there. So again, my hat's off to these guys. The other thing that they do for us is, because we're handling permanent records, my staff is very much focused on productivity, but we also have to be sensitive to these records being permanent records, and we want to make sure we're handling them appropriately. And so every year the preservation staff does training for my staff to make sure that they're handling the records appropriate, not only the burn records but also the normal records, just to make sure that those records are maintained. In many cases, some of the older records have very thin onion paper, and we need to make sure that those records aren't being torn and they're going to be preserved correctly. So I think that's it. So any questions?
We have someone on the YouTube feed asking, is there a backlog in serving those requests for military personnel from veterans? If yes, what is the monthly estimate of the backlog?
So right now we are, as of Friday when I left, it was, so the total count of cases pending was 142,000. We have we need about 40,000 requests in the queue to keep everybody busy because we've got about 260 technicians, and the way the business process works, we need about 40,000 in the queue to keep people busy. So we've got about a backlog of about 100,000. So with the with doing about 20 to 25,000 requests a week, it's about a 5-week backlog in terms of getting those processed. So when I talked through the business process and I talked about kind of how we triage things, if I was sitting in the audience, I've asked the question, well, what happens if some reason I need to get my request quickly? What would you do? Or what happens if there's a burial? How does that work? And so what happens is our call center has the ability to increase the priority of a request. So if a veteran calls in or a family member calls in and says, hey, this wasn't an urgent matter, but now it's an urgent matter. I need you to get this done right away. What will happen is we will upgrade that to a medium priority. It'll get assigned immediately to a technician and worked in 10 days. Likewise, we have a specific team that is focused on burials and medical emergencies. If a burial or medical emergency is needed, then that team is responsible for turning those around in 3 days. So it's about 14 people. We do about 100 to 120 burials a day, and that work flows specifically to that team, and that team does both regular work and also reconstruction work. And so we try to do our best to triage things to provide the level of customer service that we need. We're working really hard to bring that backlog down. I mentioned that it takes about 150 days to train folks. I've got 30 people that are in training right now, and they'll be out of training in March and April. And so we hope by the summer time frame, that backlog will be down to 60,000 over what it is right now. So we're hoping that it's going to drop by some 40,000 by the end of the year with these additional resources we're bringing on board. Any other questions? Okay, thanks. Appreciate it.
All right, thank you, Kevin. So that concludes all of our formal.
Don, before you go, we had one more YouTube question that came in that either you or Lisa, I think, would be a wonderful person to answer. Let's see. The writer asks, yesterday I had a task originating from OMB to check records management equities in federal laws that are due to expire in 2016. Did NARA have to do likewise?
No, we have not received that request, as far as I know. So we don't have an answer for that.
Okay.
But I was going to say, and that's a great segue, I'd like to thank all of our presenters this morning. If there's any other questions people had about any of those topics, we'd be happy to answer any of those. We have a good cross-section of members of Office of Chief Records Officer and the Federal Records Center program here. So if there was anything you wanted us to cover or talk about specifically, we could take a couple minutes if anyone has any specific questions before I set everyone free for lunch. So is there other questions from the audience, either online or here in the room? Questions? Hearing none, and since it is a lovely afternoon, I'm going to set everyone free. I'd like to welcome to our next BRIDG meeting, which will be Wednesday, April 13th, 2016. So we will back here, same place, same time. And with that, hopefully everyone has a great afternoon.